Hello, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Middle Earth. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer here on Lord of the Rings Online. For those of you that aren't familiar, I have been doing this work for a very long time. With little breaks here and there, but I'm happy to hang out with you all and to spend a little bit of time going through the world of Lord of the Rings Online and talk a little bit about the uh, work that we've been doing and what goes into that work. So let me just get myself where we need to go. So today we are going to the Dwarf Holds, a combination of Ironfold and Arid Mithrin. Uh, so sorry about that. Now that we're back up and running, and we're where we need to, and I'm uncloaked and we're ready to go. So the Dwarfholds and of Ironfold and Aaron Mithrin were for update 24, I believe, where dragons dwell, um, and it was my first update back here working for SSG after having a break off in project management land, working at a bunch of different companies. And I was really excited to come back here and to dive right in. So my experience working on this update was by and large focused on the dungeon and instance spaces, whereas our other designers got to do the landscape that we see here. I feel like both of these regions kind of uh, represent kind of a increase in fidelity of landscape. I think we particularly with what we've done in Ironfold, I think it is a much more robust kind of rocky terrain than we usually had seen, and we'd also like it. After being in the dark for so long, we finally got to Dale, and now we have these areas that are these like bright and outside areas, which is awesome. Um, One of the things here too, at the opening gate there, you saw that gate was there and was placed there with the creation of Dale, and then just opened up as part of our continuing development of the landscape. It's something I've talked about before that we enjoy doing is sneaking in those little bits and pieces of hints at where we could continue building, and we've even done some of that here in the Ironfold as well. So I'm gonna park right here with this great view to start. Take a look at and see some of the questions that might be happening here. Also, for those of you that have been on the stream for a while, you might know that I tend to ramble on and don't drink very often. So if you haven't seen me had a drink in a while, let me know. I'll have a sip of water. But here we are in the Ironfold. The Ironfold always kind of like I love the design of the space. I think it looks awesome. It's this very, like there's a part of it that feels very much like the some western portions of the United States, the scrublands, where it's just open with you know peaks of just raw rock just jutting out all over the place, and in the distance you have things like the Daimlik that exist there as a way to kind of help you navigate through such a wide open space. You have that, solid, strong POI to follow with. I think if I would say one thing was one of the kind of bigger challenges for this region in particular is the flow for the region kind of pushes you through it all the way through to the other side and then brings you back to the middle. Um, and I feel like that, if we had a chance to do it again, I think there are a couple of things we probably could have done or should have done for this region. One of which being, kind of make progression happen more across as opposed to kind of yo-yoing you back and forth, and also treat Ironfold like its own distinct release. I think one of the challenges we had with Ironfold was it was coming out along with Arid Mithrin, This was an expansion pack size worth of landscape, between the two regions and all of the large instances that were coming with it. And um, because of that, Ironfold got kind of short shrift. It did not get a lot of attention. It was pretty hurried through in terms of the play experience through it. This is also one of my favorite bits here is the view um, down into the Dale where the River Carnan flows. Um, I just this screams to me like at some point we'll head in this direction, and this is almost the perfect place for us to head that way. I think further along on the path here, we actually have a trail down, which eventually we could connect with a bridge and, allow access beyond. Let me run down there real quick. But yeah, I think, the view of the Daimlik when you first enter is impressive, but I think this down here is an even more like astounding and amazing view. And some of that's my own bias, like after having built Swanfleet and Cardalon and really wanting to like push that kind of open rolling hills experience, this feels a lot like that open rolling hills experience. Um, and hopefully one day we'll get there, but I don't have any ETA on when we will. Uh, let's take some questions in while we enjoy this view. So Stars and Rangers asks, can we see from the top of the Daimlik, and is there more story behind the Daimlik as well? Insight into its construction. I can't really speak too much on further story for it. I'm not exactly sure. Um, Again, my focus in this region was by and large like very, very heavily focused on the constructions of the instance spaces, which will uh, hopefully get time to. I'm going to probably run a little bit long um, on this stream just because I was a little bit late getting things going. But we'll make our way over to the Daimlik and then head over to Utterby and north from there. So let's see. Kaifer says, Ironfold is a cool region. Wish we had more reason to go back. Mentioned in crafting revamped thread that would be cool if certain locations had mats that required us to return to them. Special iron from the Iron Hills, etc. I think that's an interesting idea. Like I think I think if there's any region that was somewhat underutilized, I think Ironfold is definitely it, and there's a lot of opportunity here to grow what could happen in here, even if it was a further adventures style or landscape expansion style. Like, hey, here are new quest lines in here to help flesh out this space a little bit more. So I'm not gonna run the switchback all the way up the Daimlik, but I will rocket jump all the way up and see if the physics of it will let me stand on top of it. I'm not sure if it will. Sometimes when we build things like this, we have physics be a spike, so just in case. But here we are from atop the Daimlik. You can see impressive views all around. Kiefer says, "Yeah, it would be great if Ironfold was a larger region. There's something that can always easily be expanded upon in the future." Well, and I think like as it is, it's a pretty large space. We could certainly do things like expand out down into these areas over here pretty easily as well if we ever felt like we needed to add on to it. But I think um, part of like my interest in this is it's such a cool looking space, but the content experience in here just it's very much concerned with going to Yarn Fast, you know, dealing with the troubles in Utterby, and then heading out. And it doesn't feel like there's a lot more like there could be more done to increase the richness of this space. Um, all right, let's see. Kiefer says, random question, but considering I'm seeing a river, this reminds me I noticed before over the past few years, a lot of water bodies have lost their texture. Nenharn is a good example. It used to have waves texture of like Levendim, now it's flat. Any reason why? Often that happens when we switch from a static water type to a dynamic flow water type. So Nenharn, for example, might have at some point gotten switched over to that more dynamic water type, and then flow for it just wasn't painted. It's a little tricky sometimes too with lakes and whatnot, where you kind of want them to be a little still. I'm gonna have to rocket jump to get into Utterby. I think Utterby is a neat little town. Like, this is just a fun little, like, reminiscent. Oh, and hey, I'm wearing an outfit. Reminiscent of Breland to some degree. A little bit of Bree, a little bit of Dale. Honestly, like, I just like how it feels wandering around in here. Um, there's a good amount. There's like just enough deco, but I don't feel like I'm tripping over anything. Yeah, this is a fun little town. It's one of those where it'd be nice if we could, you know, use it in a state that is not purely just for the story reasons. Kefir says, I always just imagine what we have in game is like the furthest western portion of the Iron Hills. Yep. And Druidsfire says she's disappointed that there isn't any leftover kegs or tankards up there. Which, maybe at some point we can add another destination for the Keg of Doom. So as I move around through here, one things I did want to kind of make my way to point out as well. Again, we have our further potential passages for the future over here as well, where we have this pass going up. And I think the idea here was, you follow this pass and it could take you up and around behind Erebor and eventually link up with the Withered Heath. Again, not something that we have currently on our plans, but is definitely something that we want to leave that road open for potential future. Creefast says, can we jump off the cliff where the refugees are coming from? I believe you can, and it is a scenario special where I believe if you jump off, you die. We have smite volumes there to keep you from going too far. So we're heading up towards Hammerstead, I believe is the name here. I think one of the things too that I appreciated both from Ironfold and from Arid Mithrin when we get to Arid Mithrin is the a more outdoor, out in the sunshine dwarf experience. Like, I think a lot of what we do with dwarfs usually ends up being in caves and mines, and that's as you do with dwarves. But I also think it's nice being able to see a village that is not completely just underground. Being able to see a space that has some outdoor component to it. I think what is it in North Downs? I think one of my favorite villages, up here is there it is, Othrakar. One of my favorite dwarf villages because it's just this like little simple outdoor, just little simple outdoor space. The you talk about the scenario special. I think part of the what's the right word? Part of the one of the negatives, one of the side effects, I guess, of working on a game and doing what I'm doing right now, moving around in a admin mode, one of the negatives to that is I'm invincible while I'm doing it. So when I actually play the game, I sometimes forget that I am not invincible and just be like, oh, well, the town's down there. So clearly I can just walk off this ledge and survive that on my normal character somehow. Um, Drinks. I'm glad that we are past our heavy pollination times here because I would be much stuffier than I am right now. But yeah, so I love the look and feel of Ironfold. I think our designer who built this, like, he did a great job with it. Um, and I like being able to look out in the distance and see all of these different silhouettes that are forming from the rocks and the cliffs and whatnot. I think it just does such a great job of telling the story of the area just in that simple just look out over it and you get a sense exactly of what the land is. It's almost kind of like a gold rush territory to some degree. Um, but yeah, I love this look and feel. Um, so now we're gonna head further west. We're gonna eventually get to Yarnfast, and then once we get to Yarnfast, we'll head back over to the Dale side of things and start running through Arid Mithrin, and then jump into the instance spaces, so we can take a look at those as well. Again, the Dynelick is such a great navigational marker, and it's one of those where the statue of Thorin Oakenshield in Ered Luin in Thorin's Hall, like, pales in comparison to this. And granted, it's 15-20 years difference in age and whatnot, but still, like, if we could ever go back and redo that statue, I think it would just be well beyond like what we're currently doing. One of the nice little touches here that I enjoy is these are supposed to be the red rivers, so the water here is tinted a little bit red, not as far red as things like the Blood Swamp, but just enough to make it feel like it's a kind of little dirty, rusty river. We're gonna keep heading our way to the east. And I believe this is as far east as we've gone because we'll be over here in the Iron Hills, which are over here. So portions of Mordor are also just about as far east. It's interesting looking at this map and how like the Iron Hills would be directly north of Mordor. Where if we were to head due south from here, we'd start running into Rune. Not to say that that's where we're going to be heading. Um, you all know where we're heading next. Uh, well, update after next, not next update. But I think So Druid's Fire says Corey would pay lots of money for a proper tourist mode and admin camera. And I think I think tourist mode might be, and this is me just talking off the cuff here, not making any sort of definitive statements about anything. But I feel like tourist mode is probably more viable than admin camera because admin camera has I am aware that there are tools out there that have um, done things similar to it, but the problem with admin camera is um, the way our client works is what is loaded is very centered around your character. Um, and if you detach the camera from your character, regardless of where you move your camera, the only things that are going to load are based off of where your character is. So I could detach my camera and fly all the way down there, but what's all the way down there wouldn't load. Like, it wouldn't load because that's not where my character is. Deco Yao says everyone should have been given a jetpack while questing in Deep's Grave. Well, you have an elevator shaft right in the middle of it, so that should help, right? Um, but yeah, I love the silhouette of Yarnfast as well. Again, it's just not a style of dwarf structure that we really see all that often. It's a bit more, outdoors fortress kind of feel. We focus so much on Moria and Gundabad with the interiors, but this is, seeing dwarves outside just feels different and interesting. Let's see. Stars and Rangers asks, did the little rivers and valleys present any particular challenges with the steep walls? Um, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If you mean that, with the having the steep mountain walls around it, if it made building the valleys difficult. Um, I don't know specifically if I would say any of them were made all that difficult, or was more difficult because of that. I think working with water in general is always tricky, just because of trying to figure out how it interacts with the landscape, how it interacts with the scene files that are happening around it. We there's a lot of different properties and settings that go into water that can make what would be just normal placement a little on the challenging side. Um, so this interior is the town slash city of Yarnfast, which I had a lot of fun building. This is one of the things that I built, and I just wanted to push the idea of outside and inside a little bit with these like smaller sub interiors to the main interior. Um, and I think in large part it works fairly well. Um, I used to have a lot of, when I first built it, I think a lot of these, um, yeah, there were a lot more of these kinds of little like inside spaces that were visible, but I ended up having to remove some of them just because of weird little like rendering things that were happening. But this was fun to build, and there was I know in the Deco du Milieu Discord there was a screenshot thread going on about Easter eggs, and this is one of them here where it was originally a bug that a QA tester had found and was wanting fixed, but I thought it was fun and neat enough that I just decided to like fix it up, put an Easter egg there, and make my way. Make it a little hidden thing that unless you're really paying close attention, you wouldn't notice it. But now everyone knows it's there, so I don't know how much of an Easter egg it is anymore. But yeah, I think one of the challenges too with working in a lot of this dwarf stuff is trying to make it feel like there are multiple layers going on while also still allowing the camera to, or the maps to kind of like read it well. This was a fun little like hidden space to build as well. All right. Well, now that we're done with Yarnfast, let's head on over towards our original starting location, and then we'll make our way towards Ered Mithrin, um, which is the real bread and butter of the update. This is where like all of the big things that are happening in the region happen. In this update happen. But it is a run. We can see Ravens Hill in the distance from here, which is where we're aiming towards. I might rocket jump my way up and over Dale. We'll see. And see if I run into any walls that keep me from getting where I want to go. Let's see. So Bloodborne asks, Do you find any particular difficulties with things like trees and camera angles, like being able to? Oh, that's right. There's lots of weird physics in here. Um, with things like being able to have the fidelity of the world, but not obscuring the field of view. I think there are certainly some trees that have their foliage that are a bit lower to the ground, which makes it can make it a little challenging to like set up good shots. Um, if I had to say one set of trees that were challenging, at least as far as development goes, it's the old forest trees. Like any tree like that, that is a big trunk with a big canopy, really makes it hard to work with when you're trying to build in the macro view. When you're trying to set up and build a landscape, but you don't necessarily need to be right at the ground level right away to start working on it. So if something has a big canopy, it's getting in the way of selecting things, it's getting in the way of placing things, putting down things like mixed monster spawns and resource nodes and even patrol paths. Like that gets very tricky when you have assets that have really big selection boxes and really big physics. So those things can kind of get in the way. Uh, so now we're making our way towards Arid Mithrin. I honestly don't remember what the Impassable used to be like here. It may have, this valley may have been built for the most part, and then we just kind of hit a point where it's closed off. I don't recall. Dale and Aaron Lasgalen and whatnot were built, outside of my time. So I'm assuming there was a impassable up here somewhere. But as we're working our way up, it's funny talking about in earlier regions talking about wanting to get rid of the fishbowl experience, and then coming to an area like this where the experience really is you going up through a valley, or you kind of being in these more like high mountain plains areas where you are actually surrounded by mountains, as opposed to being surrounded by you know hills masquerading as mountains like we had originally in Bree. So, you know, looking up at like these are impressive mountains. I wish we had better fidelity for our far terrain. Like if there was one thing I wish we had for our far terrain, it was actual like far sector normal maps. Because right now the what happens with our far terrain is we have, once the terrain is outside of your currently rendered space, and you're in these looking at these distant land blocks that aren't fully loaded. There's a low res um, wireframe of the landscape that's loaded with a low res texture on it, and then on top of that is kind of like a noise layer is layered on that, and then kind of like a normal map for that noise layer. And it would be really nice if we could have our normal maps reflect the complexity of the terrain itself, reflect the mesh of the terrain itself. And now we are in Arid Mithrin, with lots of bits of the old forest taunting us for potential future expansion. Stars and Rangers asks, what was the approach to transitioning the visual of dwarf things from Erebor to Gundabad? The shift from indigo to gray-white buildings, etc. Were there particular cutoff points where the style needed to change based on border points, etc.? So I think there has been, I think in Arid Mithrin there are a few different versions of dwarf architecture, like coloration that's being used. We kind of have that gray blue. We have some of that obsidian. I think the designers that built these spaces wanted to have a mix of that base and then the obsidian to kind of be able to have some strong contrast and color pops, because if we use all of one same thing, it can feel kind of samey. And granted, with Gundabad, we leaned very heavily kind of into that, yellowish, yellowish marble look. Um, Usually, whenever we are building a region, we try to make sure whatever, at least as far as dwarfs go, we try to make sure that we select um, textures and styles that feel like they could be hewn from the stone of the area. So, Arid Mithrin has this kind of blocky blue gray stone. So going with more of the base blue and some of the black or darker colors works out really well for it. I think later on in the region as well, we have like the opal inclusions in the rocks, um, which is mirrored in some of the textures that we use. And then we moved on to Gundabad, and we kind of wanted to push that kind of more yellow marble vibe with Gundabad. Some of the areas, the rocks reflect that, some of it doesn't. And I think those decisions were made by and large just to make sure that we had contrast in the space so that we can use that for visual storytelling telling purposes. Having the darker environment contrasted by the lighter colors of the rocks. Much like here where we have the like gold highlights in the very dark structures. It's interesting too because with King's Gondor, the two dwarf settlements that were introduced in that are using their own unique texture as well. Something that's a little bit more, you know, white marble as opposed to white marble, white stone as opposed to the kind of yellowish tint that we used for Gundabad. Well, before we go to Scarhold, let's. Oops, I missed. Let's head up into the Withered Heath real quick. I think one of the trickier things about building an area with multiple textures is that kind of unfortunate texture sharing bug that will happen where if we have, for performance reasons, we'll label an entity as a shared entity. But if we change the appearance of it, all versions of that entity that are loaded for you for the remainder of your client session, basically, will use that texture. Um, we actually just had a bug with King's Gondor where there were some structures in Pelargir that were being influenced by structures in Minas Tirith. So I spent, for update 37, I went through and basically replaced all of those structures in Pelargir with brand new versions so that the texture sharing wouldn't happen. I think one of the cool things for Arid Mithrin was all of the old dragon skeletons and drake skeletons that we had gotten for there, because those act as really cool points of interest on their own. You find that massive skeleton resting, like it's no Smaug, but it's impressive. Um, Here we are at the anvil. Looking at it now, like I kind of would want to like tone down the vibrancy of the blue on this for here. Um, but I like the look and feel of the space overall. I tag teamed this area with one of our other designers. I think he was getting a bit overwhelmed with building Scarhold, so I was able to pop in and help out with this. But it feels like it evokes the vibe of the sulfur swamps Malin had in Angmar, but has just a different kind of feel to it. And the Withered Heath is another area where we've built it in such a way that if we ever decided to, we could build out further. Uh, Kypier says, I'd love it if the rest of Erebor was given a more unique texture, like the jade of the homesteads. It's something that we could possibly do in the future. I think when I built Erebor, I was really trying to similar to how we were working here in Erin Mithrin, we're using a few different types of structures to kind of build layers of contrast in your visuals, so you weren't just all looking at the same tone throughout everything. But Erebor is also a space too where we have plenty of room to expand in it, and I highly encourage people to run events in that giant theater that I built that no one seems to be using. Hint, hint. Um, so yeah, here's our view of the eastern boundary of the Withered Heath. It's certainly something where we could easily expand upon it if we ever wanted to, and that could connect. You head out west or head east, and it could eventually connect to the Ironfold in some way. So one of the things that was, I think, somewhat unique for this update was the instance cluster that came with it, um, with only like one exception. The cluster itself was all landscape instances. Instances that were built, dungeons that were built on landscape um, to appear, a little bit bigger and more grand than we normally would have them be in a dungeon space. So let me rocket jump up here. And this was you know, this this whole space here was just a great big, exercise in compromise. Because when we originally built the glacier here, we were never really planning for or expecting that the first boss fight of the raid would happen here on the landscape. So then when it came time to actually build the instance space, we had to kind of like dig out a little bit in order to have a space for the encounter. One of the challenges too was very often, like for us when we're building, we want to have some subtle changes in elevations and whatnot in order to form contours and to build, you know, to build a visual experience while you're running through there. But oftentimes for encounters and instance spaces, um, it's generally preferred that things be as flat as possible, which makes for a challenge in compromising between the look of a space and the play of the space. Um, Sometimes I think we're probably a little overly cautious on on how flat we make some space because I do want to trust our pathing system to some degree, but I also know that it's an older system and it has all of it. It has its own uh, foibles that make it difficult to work with sometimes. Um, Werenda says you have to be close to the stage in Erebor to hear it. Can that be fixed? I'm not sure if there's some sort of volume that we could put in to extend the range on certain stuff. That might be something that we'd have to reach out to game system and engineering on, if there could be special case volumes that can extend the range at which audio goes and at which overhead text goes. All right, we're working our way back. We're going to head over to Strongholds now. Let's see. Argaled says maybe a bit of a sidetrack, but we get a landscape version of the new Karn Doom. People have been able to get into that version. So that version is not meant to be gotten into. If players are able to get into it, they should report. They should let me know how they're doing it because oftentimes, there were some issues with how defeat was working that was allowing players to explore those spaces. Um, the idea behind the new Karn Doom space was largely, we create a city that's a playground for instances to happen in. And the idea being that while the entirety of it is not fully accessible through instances right now, there may be opportunities for us to go through and build new instances in those spaces as we want to. Like I have a couple of ideas for instances myself where, if I were to find the time to build an instance, like I would put something in there. Let's go down through. So there's some discussion about the size of theaters and whatnot. We know things like Weatherstock are very very uh, exciting events for people, and they're events that people love to go to. And I think for me, it's just kind of like I'm a little sad that our current method of handling chat and sound makes the actual theaters that we build, thinking that players will be able to use them, makes them not particularly useful. Uh, but certainly a conversation I can bring up with people about, like, hey, is it possible for us to get maybe a hotspot or volume that we can drop down that extends the range at which certain features can be seen or heard? All right, we are working our way up to Scarhold. I admit, like, I still there was a time where I was very heavily running dailies and whatnot through Scarhold, and I still get a bit lost in here. Um, ultimately it is one big loop, but there's enough little like nooks and crannies where if I miss a turn, then I end up just missing where I'm going altogether. But I love the look and feel of this space. It's again, it's another like complex outdoor dwarf space. Something that we didn't see too much of, and it was really nice to actually be able to, you know, have something like that here. And it's got great views. You can see here we've got the like blue opal inclusions into some of the decorations here. The idea being where we're using those as highlights and whatnot. Let's see. I see a comment about Scarhold. Let me see this thread. Scarhold is fantastic, but a monster to navigate. Yeah, it can be a little tricky. I think it doesn't help too that the ruined nature of portions of it really kind of make it a challenge at points. Because some spots like you just want to be able to jump off, but it's a little bit tricky to like navigate your way down after you jump off. I remember being really impressed when this was being built, being really impressed with the scope of what was happening in the epic here. Like the fight at the end of the epic that happens out in that courtyard that we just went through. I just when I had first come back, I was like, that was just a like massive, just epic brawl kind of thing happening, and it was just impressive to me. It's also always fun to like build a space. Let's see. Lacking corresponding quest. All right, well, I'll run into there later. Uh, and I know everybody's favorite bad guy that you hate to love or love to hate, Karazgar, featured very heavily into this piece of landscape, which a lot of people really liked him as a conflicted antagonist. It was always funny watching Maid of Lions like reading the message boards and watching YouTube and and seeing streams and seeing people talking about Karazgar and just like how excited about that character so many people were. Yao asks, how fun was it to build the Halls of Memory for the Epic? The Halls of Memory is like it was a rare. It's a rare opportunity for us as a designer to just go off the wall, batty, abstract. You know, like outside of Made of Lions saying like I need to have rooms that are themed like this and this and this. It was really just like however you make that transition, however you sell this as being an event in someone's mind. um however you sell it as a story being told with a admittedly kind of unreliable narrator. um like being able to do that was a ton of fun. And trying to like kind of push it into like a little bit of a cosmic feel felt great, and it's not something that we get to do all that often in Lord of the Rings. I think that and Puglok, the Hypnotoad, those were both like those were both experiences to build because they were asking for something that doesn't happen very often. I think there are a couple other um, instance spaces and dungeon spaces that kind of go that wacky direction. Um, and I built those too. Um, but there's not much opportunity to do a lot of that sort of stuff. So when it comes along, like you just jump on it, and who knows, like when we get into things like Rune, if we use Rune as an opportunity to explore, the Blue Wizards and whatnot, that might be another great time to start thinking about like how do we build in the abstract? How do we build, you know, Lord of the Rings metaphysical, crazy cosmic stuff? Kaifir says, "I hope there isn't Karazgar fanfic." Well, there are certainly some. Don't have a request for that either. There are certainly some web comics out there. I know there are web comics. I don't know about fanfic that's been written, but it wouldn't surprise me. Uh, uh, Argaled says, when will we see him again, as well as some of the other Mordor villains that never got wrapped up? Look, the nice thing about having characters that have kind of walked off stage but are still alive is that we have opportunities to come back to them in the future when the time is right for it. I can't speak to when that time is going to be, but it's they're chess pieces that can be moved around when we want to or need to. Kaipir says, "Oh, Thornholt, one of my favorite areas." I think there's definitely a type of moodiness that this forest had. Like, I think building it, the design intent was to really like. I feel like this does what we were hoping to do in South Mirkwood better than we did it in South Mirkwood. These trees, like South Mirkwood, has a lot of dead trees, but they're mostly just the trunk with some dead stuff up at the top. Whereas the Thornholt trees just have like they feel like they're reaching at you, they're grabbing at you, and if anyone's gone hiking out in the woods and they've like taken an old pine tree's like branch to the arm, like the feeling, how that feels. I'm waiting for Mordorith to return myself. I think he's due for his big comeback. He'll come back in a big way, I'm sure. Kaifir says South Mirkwood is great, but I see what you mean. South Mirkwood always feels Like it's always trying to measure up to some dark Germanic forest that Mirkwood should. And I think I think at the time that we built it, we also didn't really have the library of assets that we really would want to have for something like that. Like we want trees like this. We would want evil versions, evil, but or like decaying and dying versions of the trees that are used in Fangorn. I feel like when you build a forest, if you can't build it with a canopy, you want to make sure that there's interest happening in the space in between the trees. Um, and I think Mirkwood, like we did well enough with what we had at the time, but I think we have so many better options available to us now in terms of trees and design principles. Uh, so Argaled says Umbar better have camels. Well, just as a bit of a spoiler, I believe camels are on our short list for post launch of Umbar, but not really for Umbar itself, the expansion pack itself. We had a big list of things that we wanted to introduce for the expansion pack, both in terms of cultural assets, structural scenery assets, creatures, like huge list. Like the expansion pack is a big art task. We've got a great set of brand new buildings and deco objects that are well underway now. I even got to see some of the fence pieces that are being introduced yesterday. In front or that are being introduced. I got to see them yesterday, and those will be also turned into housing items as we launch the expansion pack. So now you'll be able to use the fence. Uh, you'll be able to make your fences look how you want. At least in the next neighborhood that's being introduced. If I have time, I'll retrofit it to other ones. But Druid's Fire says, "Yay! Give Yao more work to do." I'm giving Yao plenty of work to do. The next neighborhood that's coming out is going to have around 160 new housing items. Most of those are going to be focused on um, allowing players to decorate their homes as markets and farms. Markets, farms, shops. That's where the focus of my next big pack of decorations is. Very intriguing place that I started the show at. I have no clue what you're talking about. I started the show in Dale, so I can go back to Dale if people want me to go back to Dale. All right. So I would say we're pretty much done with our preview or our walkthrough of the open landscape. We could go a little bit further west, or yeah, further west, but I think we're kind of at a point where we've seen the look and feel of everything thus far. So I think it's a good point for us, and I'll get up here a little bit further, and we'll start going into some of the interiors. I'm gonna run over a little bit just because I was a little bit late getting things going today. Um, so that I can hit some of the interiors because I think the interiors, one, I'm fairly proud of how the various instance spaces turned out, but also I think it's been a little while since we've actually like taken a close look at the interiors for some of these spaces. So with that, let me just get up to a good vantage point up here, and we'll start heading into those interiors. And for those of you that are excited about and interested in the next neighborhood, we'll be doing a preview stream for that next month, I believe. Um, we definitely want to show it off to you all. So, all right, let's head into some interiors. We'll head into, so there's the Utterby Town Hall. So we're gonna kind of go back to the east and then work our way through again. Um, I really love how complex we're able to make some of these interiors, and we've come a long way from how we used to build dungeons to how we build now. Like years ago, this would have been like a pre-baked shell that we just tossed some deco in. Lighting would have been really hard because we can only influence so many things with lighting. So I just, this feels like a nice, like cozy space. Let's see. Kaifir asks, have you announced a rough date for U37? We have not announced a rough date for U37. I don't think there's been any specific. Like we know internally when we're aiming for it to be released, and I'm actually this week. You know, once I'm done with this stream, I'm going to go back into putting the finishing touches on what I'm working on for update 37, aka the new neighborhood. I love building this interior. This was just such a fun little slice of life, a nice dwarf manor with a little bit of craziness going on in it. It's not often we play when we do lighting stuff. We don't usually play with changing up the color of the specular highlights in a space, and so when I was building this, which is significant to the story that's happening in here, I wanted to really kind of play with that and throw up some unease. So we've got this blue lighting going on, but then the light here in the center has a red specular highlight to it. So it really just kind of draws you right to it, which is a fun thing that we don't do so often. Druid's Fire says, this is such a great piece of story, and having the text on the walls actually translate into something perfection. Our writers were having a ton of fun building the story, building the poems that were associated with it. Like they were just they were having so much fun with it. Stars and Rangers says Voin built one scary library. I think of it as less that he built a scary library and more that his that what was in there was influencing things. This is a great interior too. This is a fun one to run around. I just love the silhouettes too. Like I think that's the biggest thing for me is like if you get good strong silhouettes in an area, that can carry a lot. I think one of the things that was interesting about building these dwarf spaces was trying to figure out different ways to combine assets together to use them in a way that creates interesting shapes, different silhouettes, different profiles, you know, and also just like shakes things up a little bit. I think people are so used to like dwarf stuff looks this way, and I think for this it was really important to find ways to vary that up, find ways to push what we could do with dwarf architecture because we'd seen so much of dwarf architecture already. You know, we've been through Moria. We know what Moria looks like. We want to try to elevate it and move past that and do something new and different in these spaces. this was a fun interior to build as well. A little tricky to run around in just because of the physics of everything, but Gandalf's meager cottage. I always feel like whenever Gandalf stays anywhere with the dwarves, they're like, "Here, you can have a closet to stay in. This is all you get. You get this, the most simple, bare bones thing possible." Wizards, you think you're so good. So Stormwall is one of the first like major instance spaces, and it's split up over two parts. You have your initial part here, which there's more built out to it than was actually used, because when I built it, I wasn't quite sure what the need for the space was going to be. I think we knew that ultimately, the fight would happen in here. There would be a fight that was happening in here, and you would go deeper in through the spider webs into the next section of it. But I didn't really know how much of what they wanted to use it for, if they wanted to use it for a resource dungeon as well. So I made sure that there was plenty of extra space built. And then we have the Caverns of Thrumfall. I think this was just in terms of complexity of space being built, like this is the simplest of the spaces, because really it's just a quick deco pass on our existing cave set. But it does have the boss fight at the end, which go here, which is again another like fun space to build. I'm able to walk around in all of these places just because this is not the actual instance version of it. Otherwise, there'd be other things in the way. But we've got Stormwall. Oh no, we were already in Stormwall. Don't mind me. There we go. Now we're going to the Anvil, the raid. I'm going to have to. So yeah, that's what a raid looks like, everyone. That is what a raid looks like. This was an interesting one to build too, because it's a dual height map space, but there's a lot of structures placed around to kind of fill out and form everything. But I do like how these glacier pieces in particular, the way they light just like catches the edges of things, the way they're lit, so that it adds a bit more like texture and contour to the space. Hello, massive ice crawler. Woo! I wish that the platform was a little bit more. the platform up there was a little bit more interesting than it ended up being. Like I would have liked that to have been more, because it is a custom piece, so it would have been nice to have a little bit more deco and detail built into it. Um, I loved when this was being designed. I loved the pitch for the idea of where you were basically just being chased out of the mountain by the dragon. Um, it's a hard thing to sell. Um, that kind of threat is hard to sell, but all right, we'll go on to our next interior. We'll go to my personal favorite and candidate for most 80s rock band instance that we've ever made, the Glimmer Deep. I just imagine guitar riffs from the 80s happening the entire time while you're in this space. That's how I imagine things in here. It was fun bringing in these crystal assets and kind of pushing them in a direction that they hadn't been used in before. You don't get to do that all that often. Rocket jump myself up and over this. And the idea too was there are bits and pieces in the Glimmer Deep that suggest that it's connected to Stormwall as well. Like over here, there's a collapsed spider tunnel, and then also up this way there's a collapsed spider tunnel, and those are both meant to kind of imply that they are connected in some way to the caverns of Thrumfell. Up here. All right. All right. Next stop. Let's go do our final instance in here where we're actually in Thickelgundu. I think it was really interesting in the buildup of all of this with Thickelgundu and Hyasundergrot. There was always conversation amongst the players about whether or not this was the Golden City or that was the Golden City. Like, and I'm for the life of me can't remember its name right now. But like anytime we introduced like a big opulent space, people were convinced that like, oh, this is the space and whatnot. All right. Where do I go here? This is a very, very, very complex space. This is another one of those where it's like you sat down and start working on it, and then you go in one direction, and oh, that doesn't work for here, so I got to fix that, and you start working in another direction. This is also another space too where it was built specifically with okay, the instance goes through this parts of it, the resource instance does these parts, missions might come in here for other parts of it as well. So it's a space much like what we did for Carndum. It's a space that's really built with the intention of being multi-purpose. We are almost done with our tour here, so if anyone has any other questions, uh, please feel free to drop them in here, whether it's about this or other world building stuff. I'm certainly happy to answer them if I can. But we're going to be wrapping up here shortly. Like I said, our plan for the next stream will likely be the new neighborhood that we're working on. So for those of you that are excited about that, stay in the loop, and you will soon hear news about that. Probably sometime middle of next month is when we'll do that stream. So happy to see you all there. I know it is not the world's biggest secret anymore, but we're excited to show it off. I've been working on it pretty steadily over the last couple of months, taking time off here and there to do some polish on it. So I can't wait for everyone to be able to jump in and start playing with it. Boom, boom. All right, so we'll get up to the throne room, and I think at that point I'm going to call the stream to a close. Like I said, if anyone has any other questions, and sorry, I do not have the telepad for the Howling Pit handy, so I'm not going to be able to go there right now. So if anybody has any other questions before I sign off, please let me know. As always, happy to have you here. For those of you that are enjoying the Midsummer Festival, you've got a little bit of time left to wrap that up. I know at some point I need to actually get in and get my mounts and cosmetics. I've been slowly picking away at King's Gondor, and I need to focus a little bit on the Midsummer Festival just so I can get my rewards. But anyways, so I think that'll do it. I'll find myself a good place to park and call it a day. Thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate your time and your questions, and look forward to chatting with you all next time. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.